Welcome. We are meeting at the front of June 2023 to discuss the nature of the times. And appropriately under this Sagittarius full moon, we can be exploring, discovering, and questioning what is. And so my goal in these videos is not only to talk about what is taking place in our lives collectively at this time, but some of the technique that we can use in order to track and understand our own navigation, flow, and cycles through nature, as well as the big picture perspective. Sagittarius is our ontology, our root orientation to the rest of life, whether that be religious, philosophical, scientific, or otherwise. Each of us forms perspectives that somewhat creates our reality. Now, I'm not saying we are God that creates our reality via whatever we dream, but certainly our vantage point, our perspective, what we see, what we're working with, in many respects, this is our truth. Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, is the great explorer who seeks to discover the meaning of life through continuing to expand, explore, and attempt best we may to understand how are the parts and pieces related cohesively into a meaningful whole. Now, what I would say about this particular full moon squaring Saturn is this can be a reality test. And this reality test can go various ways. There's going to be different levels and dimensions I speak to throughout this video. What's going on short-term, long-term, species evolution, individual experience, so on and so forth. But this can be a reality testing time period as bubbles may be burst. What we assumed or believed might be true, or what we merely hoped could be exposed as at least having missing pieces, or there being more to the picture. So when we think of reality testing, it's usually in that, or I should say a reality check. This is normally what's bringing us back down to the pragmatic, to the simple, and what's in front of us. And this can be really taking place in a significant way at this time, as we'll also speak to the fact that Jupiter is today conjoined the moon's north node in Taurus, ruling this full moon going on the next several days. The full moon is exact on June 3rd, but as I'm going to discuss when I explain a bit more of the actual technique and structure of the universe, the species, our soul, it's not just the days of this full moon, that these dynamics I'm speaking to can be affecting us all. This full moon can also be a reality check in the opposite direction. We could have simply been closed or more limited to a much more mundane or simple, and this can be a reality check in the opposite way, having our mind blown, discovering that life is more complex than what we previously assumed or believed. And we'll talk about how this full moon, aligned with the nodes of Uranus, is a pioneering, liberating, restless, mind-expanding signature. And I'll even be revealing how some of the technique of using planetary nodes is quite pioneering and ahead of its time in and of itself. What evolutionary astrology is actually very misunderstood at this particular point in time. And I also hope to convey a little bit more of what I practice and teach, so to make some of these very useful tools that are very ahead of their time more approachable and useful for those who would like to gain an understanding of what our life is and why. So a brief little table of contents. I want to discuss what the major themes are going on this next couple weeks, start of June to mid-June. And then I also want to speak to some very basement level changes that will be occurring more long term and gradually, and yet are the extremely significant and profound shifts that will be taking place from June through July of 2023 that can be affecting us through the rest of our life. We are in a high intensity period, and this can be one of those chapters closing, chapters beginning, where we are having a fundamental change of direction. Again, these days can be sending us off into some of the places, people, new adventures and discoveries that can be long lasting and taking us through the rest of our life. I do not want to be overly redundant about Jupiter's conjunction of the moon's north node in Taurus today. It is extremely significant, but for those who've tuned to my videos, this is what we've also largely been speaking to for the last year and a half. The north node's transit of Taurus is completing this next month. Meanwhile, Jupiter just entered Taurus, conjoining that north node because they move opposite directions. And so there's this very significant introduction and really a mastery, what can be a completion of some of these Taurus themes we've been discussing for quite a period of time. What we're speaking to is embodiment. What we're speaking to is an understanding of the actual nature of life itself, in the way that life flows, in the way that nature is. Acknowledging the root of the human being. Our basic survival needs is Taurus. How we have access to resources. How we are centered within ourself, interdependent, sovereign, complete, without the complexity, the messiness, and the interferences of others. Now, when I get to discussing Pluto square the nodes, we're going to talk about why it may not be as simple as simply moving off to a hermitage by yourself, and that's that. Chances are there's a lot more of a complex mechanism that we're using to get to what I just described, being the end goal. Less is more, wisdom of simplicity. And as I mentioned, Sagittarius is our ontology. It's the actual relationship that we form to life itself by having a sense of meaning. We have to take all these different experiences and bits and pieces of life and form some umbrella of significance as to why that is. And everybody does this. Even an atheist forms an atheistic ontology. That's how they relate to the rest of life itself. So Jupiter in Taurus now is allowing this understanding of what is our place in life, our pace, our taste, our needs, that can be quite personal. I've given the example of the cow that simply eats grass all day long. The cow is not going to a therapist and asking, why is it that I eat grass all day long? The cow was born in that nature. Similarly, we can really be understanding our nature more, our way and pace, as well as the resources that we can be bringing in and where and how to tap into those resources in increasingly easy and effortless ways. So a technique we can use: pull out your birth chart. Where is 3 degrees of Taurus? And of course, if you're into astrology, you can use planetary aspects, but all of us, if we're a little familiar with astrology, see what house 03 degrees of Taurus is. Because, for example, if it's in your 11th house, which is associated with Aquarius and community, we may be understanding our relationship to community. We may be having more resources come to us from community and understanding the interconnection between the individual and the species itself. All of these are 11th house themes. So check out where 3 degrees of Taurus is, as that is where this understanding of simplicity, support, abundance, and embodiment can very much be coming in. Now, Venus is really going to take the spotlight in terms of these next couple weeks. When I'm speaking to you now, going into the first week, second week of June in particular. And the reason why this is so pronounced is I'm going to explain to you some of the fundamental understanding of the structure of life itself, the soul, the species, the earth. That's what evolutionary astrology is about. It's about understanding and seeing nature straight for what it is. None of this astrology is man-made system. Astrologers discover techniques that are already inherent within the fabric of nature. We could say that astrology is the language of God, the crest jewel of humanity, and the trail of breadcrumbs that we have to follow to get back to ourself and our highest potential. So what we understand about the structure of the universe, the soul, is that at the basement levels, Pluto, as well as the moon's nodes, has everything to do with both the individual and the species' collective evolution. This, again, is something I don't want anyone to simply believe. If you're interested in learning about the basement level of your life, why you've experienced the things that you can, please join my Astro School. The lessons on Pluto and the moon's nodes are all complete and ready to go. That is some of the most useful information. I would say it is the most useful information you or anyone else could know. The reason I'm so passionate about astrology is we as a species can be infinitely more supportive and understanding of one another as individuals through understanding astrology. My goal is not to make everybody a professional astrologer by opening this school and teaching these techniques. This is an understanding and a wisdom that will benefit anybody that makes contact with it in any way that they are choosing to live and share their life. Chances are you have relationships, chances are you have interactions, and it might be useful to have a giant spotlight and a map of understanding those things as opposed to flailing alone in the dark. So I'll discuss how Pluto square the moon's nodes going on now through the summertime is a very distinct and important signature. For all my folks who've been coming to me and saying, why is it such an intense and profound time? That's the specific signature as to why. Now, last video, you remember me mention this Mars completing Cancer, going opposite to Pluto, square the moon's nodes before going into Leo. And that was a profound transit. Asteroid Lucifer went into Aries at the same moment, and we had fireworks, reactions, instinctual compulsion, decisions, anger, frustration, desire, passion, in a very explosive way, where there's this fundamental turning point. And I'm going to talk about these cycles so you can understand now through the rest of your life. These are easy things to track. Pull up, astro.com. You can get any of these astro apps that allows you to see the full chart. This is what we're talking about. Because the full moon I'm going to speak to is not just, hey, a full moon here in Sagittarius. The full moon is the whole mandala of every single planet and every single sign, their total relationship together, and the significance of that whole picture and story at the moment of the full moon. That's how we interpret what a full moon is. So what we're talking about now is Venus is in the exact same position Mars was before. Going to complete Cancer, go opposite to Pluto, 0 degrees Aquarius, and then enter into Leo. Again, square the moon's nodes, make these extremely pronounced dynamics. Now, in astrology, everything is simply the study of cycles. Guess what? Everything changes. Everything is phasal. Everything has cycles. And this does not need to be debated. This can be clearly and objectively understood. I hope in the future we can get to an agreeable truth. That's what the whole seeking of knowledge and wisdom is. Not to lead us into you create your own reality, new age nonsense, but what is reality so we can actually work with what we have. So when it comes to cycles, there are fundamental turning points, and we call these, via the technique of planetary aspects, which is simply the study of cycles. Conjunction, 0 degrees. Square, 90 degrees. Opposition, 180 degrees. Third quarter square, 270 degrees. And then we come back to 0 degrees. In the lunar cycle, for example, we have new moon, half moon, full moon, half moon, new moon. Now, these fundamental quarter cycles are the most intense turning points between any two planets in any cycle. So you can track in any year when Venus conjoins Pluto, squares Pluto, and what we're talking about on the 5th of June is Venus opposite to Pluto, which is, again, square the moon's nodes, is a fundamental turning point in relationships, as well as our values and how we're sharing what we love with others. Now, the opposition, we'll talk about the full moon, is an opposition between the sun and the moon. The sun illuminates the moon, so the opposition is when we actually get the most clear and objective feedback and objective seeing. That's why the full moon is actually when we can see the most of how that month, that lunar cycle, is unfolding. And I'll talk more about the actual structure of the universe and how these lunar cycles work in correlation with the sun and the other planets, because it's really important for us to understand cohesively how the whole clock, we could say, works together. So this Venus-Pluto opposition brings up what? An objective understanding of relationship being reflected back from Pluto, which is the unconscious, the underworld, and the depth of the soul. And this is where we start to get feedback from others that can be quite intense. This is when we have interactions with others that can be catalyzing soul evolution and soul growth. And guess what? That is the actual nature of life and relationship itself. This is what we are born to do and to be. I highly recommend the magnum opus material, Pluto 2, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul Through Relationships by Jeffrey Wolf Green. There are many people who have studied evolutionary astrology briefly, or they've called themselves evolutionary astrologers, but to me, the actual evolutionary astrologers have actually dug deep into that book and really understand the depth of that material. We are attracted to the people that we are for evolutionary purposes. Why we experience the same patterns, partner after partner, is because we are in these relationships, patterns, and cycles for the purpose of evolutionary growth. That's an inevitability. Try to get away from that. Our life only gets increasingly scary and fearful. That's why it's always a good idea to veer into Pluto, the underworld or the unconscious, as opposed to superficially attempt to escape from ourself. And our friends who are so proficient at shadow projection, they can't look at their own stuff, they have to blame everybody else for it. Well, those people really don't like Pluto. And they're going to have a very hard time living their lives resisting that most fundamental reason for every single thing being the way that it is. That's why in evolutionary astrology, we're actually understanding what is life, because at the very root of it is the intent for evolution on the individual level, which also contributes to the overall species evolution. Okay. So Venus-Pluto opposition can be spicy. There can be upsets. There can be reactions. There is a desire and a need for intimacy and connection, as well as sharing what we're most passionate about with others. How is that being received? Where are there blind spots that are being reflected back to us? We all have to know that we have blind spots. This is why we are dependent on relationships, some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be being married or having an intimate partner. We need relationship to even have a clear sense of seeing what we are or what we are doing. So we're receiving this evolutionary laser beam via our relationships. We become more sensitive to the actual magnetism taking place on the unconscious level. So what are the ulterior motivations? What are your real fears? What are your real desires? Those things tend to get swept up, whether or not we choose to go there because Pluto is so much our blind spots. It's usually through triggers, conversations that can be quite passionate, intense, or stormy, that we're actually getting to the basement level of what really matters and what we should be talking about. But that's easier said than done. We need to be slow, protective, have our goggles and our gloves on before we enter into the underworld. And we do want to have a huge amount of generosity in listening, especially because Venus squares the moon's nodes on the 8th. So we have to actually learn to listen. We have to learn to speak. And this is about mastering give and take in a new and different way. Because as I mentioned, these fundamental quarters of a cycle, this is a very predictable time every single year. Venus conjunct Pluto, Venus square Pluto, Venus opposite Pluto, is when we go through fundamental changes in our way of relating. It is when we're going through an evolutionary spike through our relationships. So that's some pretty important stuff here. And the fact that we have the full moon on June 3rd, just a few days ahead of this Venus-Pluto opposition, chances are we're going to be experiencing some of this reality check through the reflection of the other, and it can also be catalyzing our own philosophical understanding to at least be going through a significant review. Again, Saturn squaring this moon's nodes is a reality check. I'm going to come back around and save to the end some of the advanced astrology, which is the moon's nodes, the full moon being aligned with the planetary nodes of Uranus, which also brings this dynamic of time travel, seeing into the future, understanding a pioneering direction of where humanity is going, as well as the restlessness, unpredictability that can be driving us to form significant changes. We'll come back to some of the deeper things about EA as well, such as embracing every single thing that we experience in life. We can actually understand and map how those things are a part of our soul's development. That's not something that we ever say to somebody while they're going through a significant trauma or tragedy. Can you gain the tools and the understanding to map those things? If you choose to understand those things, if you want to, if it's necessary for your soul's growth, astrology can be enormously healing, as long as it's being handled and used in the right way, because we never say to somebody going through a tragedy, oh, this is very good for you, so enjoy it. But we can understand those things going on behind the scenes, even in our most challenging periods. Okay. Now, speaking about glimpses into the future, I'm now going to talk about these basement level tectonic plate shifts that we can all be experiencing in a significant way, especially June through July 2023. We are at a high point in this evolutionary mechanism that's going to really profoundly initiate us into new directions, understandings, and orientations. I think it can really be kicking off at this particular month of June. So Pluto, as I mentioned, has been at 0 degrees Aquarius. We have had Pluto in Aquarius be introduced and foreshadowed since March of this year. Pluto's going to move retrograde back into Capricorn June 11th and remain there through January of 2024. Now, the moon's south node, on the other hand, has been in Pluto's sign of Scorpio since January of 22. So this is very significant because we have Pluto ruling the moon's south node and square that south node simultaneously. They're both about to change zodiac signs in this next couple of months, so we can really be noticing these shifts, as well as the mechanism I've mentioned in previous videos where the square between the moon's nodes is tightening, it's applying, becoming more and more tense before finally shifting in July. Okay? What this brings up is an evolutionary mechanism of reverberation. This is my month. I'm a Gemini. I'm always bipolar, but I've never been more bipolar in my life than this particular time as we're going back and forth between the moon's nodes. South node Scorpio, I need intimacy. I need to be in my passion, my power. I need to change this boring ass reality that feels so stuck and stagnant. And oh my God, North node Taurus, this is overwhelming. I need to get my feet back on the ground. Get me the fuck away from them. I feel super overwhelmed and claustrophobic. How about I just pay the bills and sit outside in the sun and forget about the rest? Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. As I mentioned, this is a dynamic that's like beep, 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 beep. Getting hotter, more intense, and more chemically reactive this next couple of months. And then we go through this fundamental shift. And it's like birthing a new evolutionary direction. It's birthing a new baby in terms of what we are and what our life is all about. Now, I got to be real about Pluto going back into Capricorn through the end of January 24, because again, Pluto rules the South Node. So we're talking about June 11th through July 17th. Pluto will be in Capricorn, ruling the South Node. Before we see that nodal shift, July 17th, where Venus goes from ruling the North Node Taurus to ruling the South Node in Libra. So this is a lot of technical stuff I just blabbered. But let me attempt my best to explain this. There are loose ends in terms of Pluto and Capricorn, which has to do with our ancestry, our karma, these cyclic patterns that seem impossible to escape from. Well, when Pluto entered Aquarius the last several months, we just got a sample of something different. We just got a little sample of the future, where things are going. And that's to set a necessary direction. That's to set a necessary spark. And that spark's not going to blow away as the winters of Capricorn return. But are we likely to see on the collective level some bureaucratic challenges, some resurfacing of patriarchal dynamics, understanding our own relationship to these things? As if we're going to only point to patriarchy on the outside, we need to understand that's a little amateur as we understand our relationship to everything. We're healing on the inside and the outside simultaneously. So we're really looking at ancestry, these patterns of redundant, broken record of oppression, bureaucracy, injustice. We're also really looking at our orientation to society. We have a duty as a human being to contribute something back to the world and society. That's not something we can just cop out of or blame dark forces for screwing up for us. We are all responsible for the co-creation of the species development. And that is in no way, by the way, pointing at starving or imprisoned people and saying, hey, you should change your situation. No. But we all have something to contribute in some way. We have some work to do. And again, our own ancestral healing and understanding the patriarch within ourselves is really essential for any soul healer, witch, magician. I mean, that is a huge discerning factor for myself in the understanding of whether someone is really safe, if someone's really accountable, if someone's really mature, spiritually mature, which to me is very different than a lot of the New Age beliefs. So I'm going to talk a little cosmologically here under this Sagittarius full moon, which, by the way, is probably one of the most debatey of any given year, because we have the Gemini season, which takes place from end of May through the majority of June. And then this full moon in Sagittarius really brings up this debate, discussion of what's true, what's not true, who's right, who's wrong, fake news. My own personal understanding of what is life in nature and how our species could best evolve into its potential, particularly driven through the rediscovery of astrology, which is not a man-made system, but is the direct observation and recognition of what is nature itself. What we're seeing is that we are these parts and pieces. We are the zodiac. We are the planets. We have all these different seasons and cycles. So patriarchy, aside from just being male dominant, this or that, tried to partition nature into good and not good. And this is part of why humanity lost touch with nature. And we created society that's actually oppressive to not only nature, but also the natural way of being for humans. Religion, which is a Sagittarius phenomenon in the Pisces age, attempted to convert everybody to a one-size-fits-all belief system. This is certainly being unconsciously repeated in popular New Age beliefs, which is something you hear me get on my soapbox and preach about, or against rather. The New Age belief is that we should all get along, that we're all on the same page, that we should all pray to the same gods, that everything is one love and light, and that, I would argue, is a part of the overall reality, especially people that are getting into more advanced understanding of God and the creation. It gets less and less simple. Less and less, this is good and this is not good. It's more like, this is everything. And we're learning about how everything comes from the same source. So as a Gemini myself, I will be the first to admit that I am not merely good. I have good and evil within myself. That does not mean that my goal is to attempt to do evil things. I simply recognize via my own gift of free will, my propensity to go either way. I want to make the right choices. Do I always make the right choices? No. Especially people that are more willing to do risky things, go against the grain, be pioneering or avant-garde ourselves. It is even more risky territory, and I think this is why so many choose not to test their own belief system or push against edges or challenge authorities. But I do, and that's why some of what I preach through this channel is that I'm not encouraging us all to pretend that we are the same. Astrology has reflected back to me that we all have highly unique natures, and that's what I would like us to embrace, is let's not try to encourage Gemini to be all singular one thing. Let's not encourage Pisces to be the most grounded and office cubicle-oriented people, and let's not shame Capricorn for wanting to contribute to society, so on and so forth. So we don't want to discount Pluto or Saturn from our ontology, and I observe quite a number of religious, spiritual, tradition, or New Age have this type of condemnation of the parts and pieces that we are. As I've said in many times in these videos, the feminine, which is so much of the most missing and needed medicine on this planet at this time, irrelevant of our gender, is emotions. The understanding of emotions being like changing weather, the ego, that our subjective inner child's experience, though it changes from being pleasant or unpleasant, comfortable or uncomfortable, is not merely an interference, is not merely complaining. You see, we understand how everything relates together. So the moon, our ego, our subjective emotional experience, is how our soul is evolving by having that personal emotional experience, by having those unique, individual, even frustrations. That doesn't mean that we want to become basket cases and lose our sensibility and just be emotional to the point of being uncomprehendable. But everything is included. Everything is important. Everything is required. Now I'll speak to this full moon being aligned with the nodes of Uranus. Again, this is a bit of ahead of its time astrology, so I'm happy to share a bit of what it's like to be a pioneer. You're so damn lonely. You're not at all worried about anybody copying you. You actually can't believe that you're the only person on the inside, and you want people to copy you. So I hope more astrologers are going to start looking into planetary nodes. They were first developed by Dane Rudyard, then very much refined by Jeffrey Wolf Green. That is what it means to be an evolutionary astrologer, is you are in contact with these Renaissance men who were super geniuses. Any spiritually evolved soul has their higher ups on any single level. So I also really hear immaturity when I hear the New Age touting, you create your own reality. There's no such thing as gurus. Everything you dream into being, on a certain level, sure. But every single highly evolved soul I've made in contact with has no appreciation of that idea and has profound respect for their own authorities and their own higher-ups, which every single person does. By the way, I mentioned that I'm a good and evil person, a Gemini. That's what it means to be a human being. This is where I simply want to exemplify where I hope all of us can reach a level of understanding. This is what it means to be alive. As we evolve, we don't declare war on evil in a crusading type of way. We actually learn what its function is. That doesn't mean that we enable it, but we understand how to form a relationship to it that is healthiest, that's going to help the most people, that's going to allow us to channel or work with those forces in a way that is not destructive. It is oftentimes where we become most hypocritical when we point the finger at somebody else. It's he or she who is sinless casts the first stone. Before we can point out this stick in our brother's eye, we need to remove the log from our own. And yet, as easy as it is to say that, what do? Just remain passive through the rest of our life, never point things out, never disagree with others, never declare fights or wars when necessary? I disagree with this too. Being a Gemini, reality is circumstantial. Sagittarius likes the one-size-fits-all. No matter what happens, be happy. No matter what happens, forgive, accept, and love. And that's beautiful to hear, but when it comes to actually evolving and engaging in real life, every single case-by-case experience is circumstantial. That's Gemini reality. That's where this full moon can become very interesting and debatey, because we're hearing from a lot of different people's perspectives, and Jupiter on the North Node in Taurus is taking us into, well, what works for us? How can we orient to the world that's going to work? And I'm going to let you know that's not going to be by being understood by everybody. The goal is not to be understood by everybody, and if we attempt to do that, we're only going to shoot ourselves in the foot. Speaking of the nodes of Uranus, Uranus has so much to do with geniuses and pioneers. Einstein, being a Uranian soul himself, said it takes courage to be a genius. It takes confidence to go against the grain. This is where I get on my soapbox and continuously preach to the demographic of the new age. We are not all the same. We are not preaching the same things. Every astrologer is not leading you in the same direction. We are not all ascending in the same way. And in fact, there are different types of ascension. There are different types of enlightenment, and there are completely different spiritual orientations. One of the best ways to see that reflected back through our species is to go to India, where you have these fundamentally different spiritual paths. Do they agree with one each other? No. Even some of the most evolved and inspiring souls on the planet are debating some of the other really inspiring and evolved souls, and it is amazing to see. But this is an understanding of what humanity is. And people really have a low standard for what a guru is, by the way. Speaking of Sagittarius, Jupiter, which in Vedic is called guru. The guru, I'm not going to say, encourage anyone what to believe, but if that were true, the guru is portal to God, period. Therefore, we would want to be using our mind and our skepticism and our doubt to thoroughly test anyone. Are they truly that? And what is your standard for God? As I see a lot of people's standards can be quite low. And please bear in mind, who is speaking to you right now in no way, shape, or form ever claims to be above the struggles and the challenges that I'm describing in these videos. I talk about it all, and then I struggle with all the same damn things. I have to listen to myself and then struggle to apply my own teachings or lessons. So please bear that in mind. Please be self-aware of who I am and my own humanity. This is also why I am passionate to get people into my school of EA. I'm always missing information. I'm always making mistakes in these videos. The horrific thing to me is there ain't going to be anybody to catch those things. In fact, I once had a student in my school ask me, I'm a therapist and I'm using astrology to address my clients. I don't know any astrology myself, but that doesn't really seem to matter because they don't know any astrology either. So is it okay for me to be using astrology in my therapy? Hey, doc, is it okay if I start doing surgeries on people's bodies even though I've never taken any time to study human anatomy? It's an amazing world we live in. But again, when you're an actual pioneer, the inescapable sense of being alone in the room is overwhelming, and you're not worried about people copying you. I hope that people start to seek this information out for yourself. By the way, there has been no book written on planetary nodes, even though they are exceptionally important and useful in understanding everything. You can certainly go to the School of Evolutionary Astrology, where there's quite a bit of information on planetary nodes. And I'm going to, in the video description, point to my friend Bradley Narrigan, who's sitting on quite a wealth of wisdom of planetary nodes. It's a work in progress, but if you follow his Instagram, he does post where the planetary nodes are every single day. So if you are a researchy, studying astrologer, I encourage you to check that information out and to start looking at these things in your chart. The nodes of Uranus for every human being are in the Gemini-Sagittarius polarity. If your moon's nodes are aligned with the nodes of Uranus, you're going to be an overall Uranian soul. My moon's nodes happen to align with the nodes of Neptune. I've got some Neptune in me. You could say that our individual's evolution is aligned with that planet's collective evolution when we talk about moon's nodes aligned with planetary nodes. But Jeffrey Wolf Green, the great pioneering astrologer himself, had his moon's nodes aligned with the nodes of Uranus. Hunter S. Thompson, the most revolutionary, unsettling, liberating, rule-breaking Uranian soul and writer, right? South node Gemini, North node Sagittarius, aligned with the nodes of Uranus. This is extremely useful information. So as a conclusion here, I mentioned some of those outdated spiritual beliefs as we're at the tail end of Pisces. These very simple, easy, just love and light, just accept everybody, just hang yourself on a cross, just bleed yourself out constantly, just believe yourself into these realms. And that is, your own spiritual work is going to be increasingly challenged as we're evolving into the Aquarian age. I have to say, when Pluto dipped into Aquarius and people are really fearful of artificial intelligence, I'm a little concerned for y'all because we have no idea where things are about to go. But I'll be the first to let you know, humanity is already a cyborg. As we're entering the Aquarian age, we could say that God, the species, wants us to be increasingly entering Aquarian consciousness. This is science, this is seeing, this is knowing and not believing, and it is also the willingness to break rules and take risks to go against the grain in order to make brilliant discoveries. And that's some of what we can be using, harnessing, and embracing under this full moon, which, by the way, is not just June 3rd. It's not just this moment in time. Every single month, we've got the new moon. That sets the tone. The snapshot of the new moon is not just where the moon is. It's the whole planetary mandala, the relationship of everything at the time of the new moon. The full moon, the whole planetary mandala. Those two charts, those two key frames, describe the fundamental energy and nature of the entire month. So these dynamics are going to continue through the weeks to come. But again, this is a reality check. Either it's time to get our feet back on the earth. We may have been swimming in other planes, and this world is calling us back to it. Or if we've had our heads stuck in the sand and limited ourselves to some unnatural role identification, or some type of mundane, useless work that does not honor our soul's nature, this reality check could be mind-blowing, opening us up to expanding into new cosmologies and belief systems that can really introduce a whole new reality. And what I encourage for us all is to form ontologies that work, that we not merely accept or believe, but we take the information and test to form the healthiest orientation to the rest of life in our relationships, in our service back to the world. These things are measurable. There needs not be any debate. And similarly, with everything that I broadcast through this channel, I do not want you to simply take it on my word. I appreciate skepticism the most. I want astrology to be introduced back to humanity for what it is, as a science that comes directly from life experience and observation in an irrefutable way, through comparing with thousands of other humans that are living and experiencing on the same plane, same dimension, with their feet on the same earth as ourselves. Again, you can join my school. There we teach evolutionary astrology, which I have found to be the most powerful, useful tool in existence in order to understand with a high degree of clarity that would otherwise be impossible. Most of us grew up in a world and a reality that in no way, shape, or form assumed or believed that such a knowledge or a clarity is even possible. Again, don't just take my word for it. I'll be posting this month's Q&A later today, as well as the Astro Calendar, which is free for all community members. The community is free to join. My Astro School is a monthly subscription that includes a monthly Q&A meeting. In that Q&A, we test drive evolutionary astrology. As someone's describing their life experience or their struggles, we pull up their chart. I'm circling the parts of their chart that they're speaking to as they're conveying it, so we can see how astrology in real life lines up. Time after time after time, person after person after person. So not only do you get to learn EA, have it proven and test driven in real time, it's an opportunity to get a mini chart reading from yours truly every single month. I know of no other educational opportunity exists like this, so I hope to see you there. And last but not least, thank you so much to everybody that contributed and donated in the last video. I was absolutely overwhelmed by the amount of positive response. I apologize that I'm unable to thank each and every one of you, but to the depths of my heart, I thank you for your support and allowing this continued, video broadcast, as well as the other free services to continue to be put out there, and allowing me to feel passionate and encouraged to continue showing up and sharing this work. I look forward to seeing you next time, where we discuss the forthcoming Gemini new moon. And as always, please do take care.